Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Way Too Long Author Salon. This week I am very happy to be joined by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. This was out 2020, correct? Originally.
2020 and then 2021 with an epilogue on January 6th,
Yeah,
a new edition. Yeah.
yeah. As you can see, my copy is plenty marked up, all the way through. And I've come back to this book a number of times since it came out. And Ruth and I first met was last fall, I think, right, in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a conference on Christian nationalism and authoritarianism, where she was gracious enough to be on a panel where we were releasing at PRRI some new data on authoritarianism. I had a really rich conversation there. So we've stayed in contact since then. For those of you, you probably have all seen her all over the place and in print and on camera and on NPR and all of that. But just to give you the formal thing, she's an internationally acclaimed historian, speaker, political commentator for CNN, other publications, professor of history and Italian studies at New York University, lives in New York. So we're just going to jump in. So, remind everybody how we do this. We are going to first, let me just invite you all to say hello in the chat. If you want to say, your first name and where you're connecting in from, that's always helpful to see. And then go ahead and if you have questions you want to ask, we will turn to those about midway through, so about 7:30-ish. We will turn to questions and answers. So if you'll put those in the Q&A box, that'll make it easier to sort out from the comments. And I will turn there, and we're going to get to some current events. Obviously, we have more than enough just right off the headlines today to talk about. But I do want to take a step back, because I think one of the big values of Ruth's work and this book is that it gives us a framework for kind of sorting and sifting through the noise, seeing what's important, seeing where the patterns are, and really which things ought to be setting off the blinking lights on the dashboard, and maybe which things are a distraction. So we're going to kind of talk about some bigger frameworks, and then we'll absolutely get to the things that are right in front of us in the news today. But I want to start really with some big themes. And it was remarkable. Again, this book came out in 2020, which means you were working on it during Trump's first term.
Yeah.
Right. So you had a lot of that right in front of you, but like some of the themes, what's I think so valuable about the book is that it's not just a US book, but you draw on your
Yeah.
history of not just Europe, but South America and other places around the world where there's a kind of script that we're seeing. And I thought I'd just start there and ask you about, this big theme that we've heard a lot about of desolation to greatness, right? And kind of how that has played out. We've certainly heard that. I love your quote of George W. Bush, his comment of Trump's first inaugural address, where he said, "Wow, that was some weird shit." But let's start this. So this kind of desolation to greatness theme, and that's not just Trump, right? I mean, that's kind of part of the formula.
Yeah, and it's so the idea of the strongman as the savior of the nation, and to be the savior of the nation, it means the nation must be in a terrible shape. Uh, and this has been an abiding thing with Trump, where he called the nation repeatedly during his election campaign that it was like a garbage pail, the garbage bin of the world. It's like, really? But you have to be the garbage bin so somebody can clean you up, and that, of course, would be him. But this has been used by, it was used by Mussolini, of course, by Hitler, and so the awful, part of this is that in order to clean up the nation and save it, you have to get rid of or lock up. There has to be somebody who has to blame for this. You have to scapegoat somebody. And throughout history, when you do a book that goes over 100 years, it's really been remarkably, there's been a lot of continuity. It's if it's right-wing authoritarianism, of course, it's the left, but also liberals. The fascists went after priests if they were socially progressive or liberal priests. So, religion is not immune to this. LGBTQ people, that is a huge through line. Ethnic minorities, religious minorities. So and women are, so authoritarianism has always been about taking away the rights of the many, reproductive rights, assembly rights, free speech, and benefiting the very few. And depending on the regime, that could be, it's like the very rich, or of course the party officials. But these are the people who win out from, quote, saving the nation.
Mm.
So it's remarkable to have, and immigrants, of course, immigrants is Mussolini was a big kind of adherent of great replacement theory back like literally 100 years ago. Talked about black, brown, and yellow. That's how he talked. People who were having too many babies, up through Stephen Miller today, talking about the dangerous invasion and criminal aliens. So many of these themes haven't changed at all in 100 years. And now we're seeing their application in very nefarious ways in America.
Yeah. Can so, the word Hitler has already come up. And I want to ask you about that because, I've used this analogy as well. I had a really weird experience where I wrote a piece on Substack where I just took Trump's language, right, that he was using in speeches, and like showed how you could literally lift it out of Mein Kampf, right? That it was just when he was talking about vermin,
Yeah.
poisoning the blood of the country, like, and I just literally showed, like, there's where it is in Mein Kampf. Here's the paragraph, right? And when I went to promote that on social media, it got flagged as hate speech
Yes.
because I had connected it to Hitler, and I escalated this all the way up with like LinkedIn, and could
Yeah.
not convince them, right? That like, look, I'm a scholar. I've got
Yeah.
footnotes. Like, I'm not like making some wild Hitler analogy. Like, I'm actually showing like the quote. And there is this kind of knee-jerk reaction, and even as academics, we were rightly taught not to reach too quickly for the Hitler analogy, right? Because it was always thought to be hyperbolic. And so people are like really reticent to do that. But, I've found myself, and I know you have too, when it's right there, we should talk about it. So maybe just maybe talk a little bit about that, and whether you get much pushback when you kind of make these comparisons. People say, "Oh, come on, you're making too much of this."
Yeah. I think that the way I always put it is, at least in terms of the book, but also my work, it's not really a comparison. It's to show, my book is a history of over 100 years. And so it shows how, rather than comparing them, it shows how certain blueprints and certain strategies, including calling people vermin, get reused. The outcome is different because we don't have as many one-party states. It's not going to look like historic Nazism. Um, the Holocaust was, a multinational, transnational criminal operation, the biggest of its kind ever in history. That isn't going to happen on that. It's not going to look the same. So, but there's a reason that Trump and company are very sensitive to these comparisons, to the point that in 2022, Trump sued CNN for $475 million for comparing him supposedly to Hitler. And I know all about this suit because my work was named in it. I wasn't personally sued, but so the people named were Jake Tapper, who said something on air, Chris Chalitza, who's no longer there, and then CNN at the time, they shut down their opinion section after this. I think too much liability. But at the time, they published over 1,000 op-eds a year, and many of them by freelancers like me. I've never had a contract, and only one of those op-eds was singled out for prominently. It had a very long quote in the lawsuit, and it was because I was talking about the big lie, and I was exposing his method of lying, calling it a big lie, which was not just me calling it a big lie, but they didn't like that at all. And so, of all the people cited, there was, I remember, an alarmingly long kind of excerpt from my op-ed, and they were very angry, and it got dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge, so nothing happened. But then, when he started with the vermin, the Washington Post interviewed me, and also my colleague, who's now at Columbia, Tim Naftali, And we said, this is like what Mussolini and Hitler, this is the way they talked. And Steve Chung, who's the thuggish, communications person who comes from the world of wrestling, the Washington Post went to him for a comment on our analyses, and he said, and this was like, I guess 2024, said that those who make such associations will find themselves crushed, like something like crushed like bugs, when Trump returns to office. So I'm saying these stories because he really doesn't like to be called out on this, because there's something there in terms of the rhetorical strategies, and also telling Chief of Staff General Kelly that he wanted U.S. generals to behave like Hitler's generals. There's he's got an admiration there for Hitler, for sure. You can say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of these kind of bigger frames and scripts, I found, again, one thing that I found so helpful is distilling out some of these patterns that you can see echo across geographies, across time. And three that you hold up in the book are kind of interlinked: utopia, nostalgia, and crisis, kind of three frames of mind that you talk about. I wonder if you can maybe just unpack that a little bit and how those work together. We're certainly seeing some of those. I wrote a piece back during Trump's first term where I talked about white evangelicals, and I argued in a piece for The Atlantic that they had been transformed from values voters to nostalgia voters. Like that was the term
Mm-hmm.
that I used for, I think some of the same reasons. But maybe you could just unpack those three things: utopia, nostalgia, and crisis, and how they work together. How we're seeing that today.
Yeah, and all of these have the reason these narratives are so, including the savior, most
Yeah.
obviously, the reason they have a pull on people is that they can both be secular, but they obviously have religious. They build on religious narratives and religious doctrine, and that's why that's what propaganda works best, when it builds on something familiar, like on a belief that you already hold, and then it kind of leverages that. So Utopia, you're building a better nation, like make America great. So that's the forward part.
Hmm.
And so obviously for Hitler, it was the extreme, the population engineering for Aryans. But for Mussolini, for example, it was that Italy was disrespected. People thought Italians weren't serious, and we were going to be transformed, he said, into a modern nation, a respected modern nation. So everybody has their version of that, the utopia, and of course, for communists, the revolution is held. It holds out a kind of utopian future. So that's that. So it mobilizes people around a future project, and that's very compelling. But it can't only be future, especially for right-wing authoritarians. It also has to be nostalgic. So it's make America great again. You got to have the again, and because it's going back to a time when and Mussolini he defined fascism as a revolution of reaction. So that's the utopia, and the reaction is that we're gonna turn back the clock and restore things when they made sense, when women didn't have as much rights, and of course each country has its version of that, each politician. So we know what Trump's plan is for nostalgia, and it's being activated now, right? So that's the nostalgia, and it's this there. It's also very compelling. Like we don't like today. Things are changing too fast. The wrong
Hmm.
people are getting power. We want things to go back to when the white Christian male was supreme, and of course this is also a utopian construction sometimes. So then the third time frame is crisis, and that's what we're in right now. um, when and they're all going at the same time, because authoritarians are all about contradictions. And crisis is when you create a crisis, or you take advantage of a crisis that actually happened, like the Reichstag fire, or in Turkey, Erdogan managed to kind of come out of the military coup against him in 2016, and he launched an enormous crackdown that is saving the nation, right, from subversives, and it's still going on today. So crisis is when the very essence of the nation and its future are threatened. And it's always the same. It's the internal enemy, could be Jews, could be Muslims, or now we have immigrants, but they have to be, to be most effective, they have to be in collusion with an external enemy. So thus, Jews are not just inside your country. It's also like Jews everywhere, like globalists. Immigrants, so what we're seeing now with Hegseth and Miller, I've been tracking they're saying that there's foreign terrorist organizations and international gangs who are colluding with immigrants inside, right? So you always have to have that, and that's crisis. And when you, and the only solution to crisis is force to restore the order of the nation. And over again, this has become a recipe, a justification for crackdowns, for police states, stuff like that.
Yep. No, it's so like clarifying and helpful. I want to kind of go back to the nostalgia thing. You know, when we first had our kind of first in-person conversation back in New York, you know, we were releasing all this new data, and we were showing all the positive correlations between this view of Christian nationalism, right? That the U.S. is a Christian nation, that that U.S. laws should be based on, you know, on the Bible and Christian teaching. We should declare it a Christian nation. All those kinds of attitudes, and how tightly correlated they were to support for Trump, support for the MAGA movement. And in fact, we even, you know, after the last election, released some data showing that in every state you can see that tight correlation. So it's not just a national thing, but even at the state level among white Americans in particular, there's nearly a linear correlation between support for Christian nationalism and support for the MAGA movement and Trump. And this idea, right, that how nostalgia plays in a religious key back. And I thought it'd be helpful, you know, you talk about it in places like you might not expect it, like Russia, for example, right? So I think sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is, oh, wait, Russia's, you know, atheist and against religion and isn't going to be like leaning on religion, but that's not really the case at all, at least in Putin's Russia. So I'd love to hear a little bit about you kind of make some of those connections between this kind of Christendom idea, right? Kind of restoring Christendom and Western civilization, that whole set of rhetorical strategies, and how that looks kind of here and even in surprising places like Russia.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of the stuff the propaganda we're hearing about now and we've been hearing about in America, you know, it's not limited to Trump administration, but since 2016 about saving civilization, a lot of that is repeating pronouncements of Putin and Kremlin propagandists from 2012, 2011, 2013. And I have some examples in my book where Putin, you know, Putin decided to kind of use Christianity and the Russian Orthodox Church as his partner. They are very, very important partners in the Putin project. And so they give him, the more corrupt the leader becomes, the more murderous, which of course Putin has plenty of blood on his hands, the more he needs the church to be seen blessing him. You know, he takes an ice bath, and there are the priests waiting, you know, with their beautiful, what are they, scepters, to bless him when he comes out. He depicts himself on calendars, you know, not only sniffing flowers and fields, but also in church. So he has created a sense of himself as pious, and this is part of his alliance with the Russian Orthodox Church. In return, the church has gotten a huge amount of money to restore its churches and restore Russian Orthodox churches in Russia and around the world. So it's what I call an authoritarian bargain, and it's been very effective. And then many people, you know, have looked at how the Russian Orthodox Church also has. It's part of the information warfare and surveillance apparatus. And so it's connected to intelligence networks. be hard for it not to be in Putin's
Hmm.
state. So it's a whole political operation. But what it does is undergird this whole ideology of saving civilization by cracking down on LGBTQ people who are morally depraved, other kinds of morally depraved people, and using religion and morality to smear people who you don't like politically.
Yeah.
So,
The radical
um,
left lunatics and
yeah,
evildoers, right? Yeah.
evildoers or people there was people can get uh, like smeared with accusations of pedophilia or just whatever, but that's how morality policing is used. And so this Christian jump thing is big there. It's also very big in Orban's Hungary,
Hmm.
where they have all kinds of they've kind of featured churches that go back to the Christendom era. And that's very big there for the similar reasons.
Yeah. Where Tucker
Also,
Carlson and CPAC
yeah,
have been hanging
exactly.
out. Yep. Yep.
And even in Brazil, which you might not think, Bolsonaro is, he's an evangelical, and there's the European kind of minority there, which he belongs to. He's Italian origin, and he converted from Catholicism. And so there they have kind of tried to weaponize the Christendom thing in Brazil. So it's part of the toolkit of right-wing authoritarians, pretty much wherever they are.
Yeah. And of course, we're seeing that in spades, here with like the anti-Christian bias commission, right? And it's designed to protect
Exactly.
one particular kind of Christianity. And I was so struck, when he spoke on the campaign trail to the national religious broadcasters, which is a whole room full of evangelicals. Like that's the place where he decides to say, "We're going to bring back our religion," right? Just to this room full of white evangelical folks. He certainly isn't saying that to any kind of audiences of color, right? We're going to bring back our religion, right? It's this white European Christendom that kind of has in mind there. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah,
and one of the other continuities, which is just very frustrating, is many times the people who make these bargains that are very effective with religious institutions and are held up as you know paragons of morality and people are blessing them, they're the most depraved and impious people. Like Mussolini not only was a complete atheist, he hated the church so much because he'd been a socialist that he wrote like a book about a cardinal that had a mistress. He truly hated the church. And yet he was the one who did the Lateran Accords, and he was praised by the Pope as a man of destiny.
mm,
And of course, Trump doesn't have a pious bone in his body. He's completely amoral. But he's been the one who is, by not just Christians, but Orthodox Jews. He's saving the nation. He's there by the will of God. He's the divine vessel, all of this. And so there are some who seem to have been somewhat personally pious, like Franco, but a lot of them, it's like a totally disproportionate to their character and their actual belief, lack of belief, and the
yeah.
way they're held up by publicly by religious partners.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting, watching the somersaults that particularly white evangelicals have turned trying to square the circle of their support for Trump,
Yeah,
and so first it was, oh, he's a immature or baby Christian and he'll mature and he'll grow into it, right? As this presidency goes on, we're not hearing that anymore. And now it's just purely transactional. Oh, he's our guy, he's our bully, essentially, is the argument that we're really
yeah.
hearing now. And it's kind of out there in the open. So we're going to turn. I'm going to ask one more question on my end. We're going to turn like 5 minutes to Q&A. I see maybe one question over there. So go ahead, and if you've got some questions you want to field and get Ruth to answer, put them over there. I'll turn to them in about 5 minutes. The last one I want to ask about, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about where we sit right now and what we're staring at this week and ahead for this weekend. But you're right. I found very interesting about aesthetics, like aesthetics, AESTHETIC, politics as an aesthetic experience. And I do think it's something that Trump has been very skilled at doing. It's kind of political theater,
Hmm.
staging, very aware of imagery, and those kind of snapshots. I mean, everything from he's now redone his official portrait twice, right? From his original smiling portrait to a kind of gold tinted, ominous one to now a very darkened, ominous one that's hanging on the wall. And I'm guessing it's going to be rolled out this weekend in banners and all kinds of crazy stuff at the military. Um,
Is he? Oh, he has a new one.
he does. He just last week it
Oh,
went
I didn't
even
know that.
darker. So this one is like in shadow. It's all the flag has disappeared
Oh,
behind him. It's all black
oh,
behind him. It's quite ominous, even
I'm gonna
compared
look
to
that
the.
up.
So he kind of went from like smiling with his little pen to mugshot Trump, and now this one is
Yeah,
just dark, dark, dark.
I see. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Okay.
So it's worth looking at,
Yeah.
on the, and it's up now at the White House just this past week. But maybe say a little bit more about, yeah. So you talk about this aesthetic experience, always with the leader as the star of the show, right, in the center of it.
Yeah. Really, people roll their eyes when I say this, but I'm still going to say it because I believe it. Trump is one of the most skilled propagandists in history, and he really is. He got tens of millions of people to believe that he won the 2020
Yeah.
election, working not in a one party state. It's easy if you have a one party state like Hitler and Mussolini and, you know, Xi Jinping today. He was working in a completely pluralistic environment, uh, in a democracy, and he still got all those people. He's been emotionally and psychologically conditioning people along certain vectors for a long time now, 10 years. Like
Yeah.
violence is the way to solve problems, the leader cult, that he can do no wrong, that he loves them, all of these things, and they're the exact same things as Mussolini used to say. So
Yeah, I was just looking this up, like
really skilled.
I was looking at this the other day. There are still 31% of Americans who believe that the 2020 election was stolen, and a
Yeah,
majority of Republicans still believe that today. I mean, it's just remarkable.
yeah, and okay, I don't want to give him too much credit because if Fox News weren't
Yeah,
backing it up 24/7 and all the other parts of the media ecosphere, it wouldn't have worked. But the hinge and the bond that he has, because he's the one who benefited personally from January 6th. Had it gone on, had it worked, he was the personal beneficiary. That's why they turned out for him. So that's he's really good at it. And he also is a man of television. He's a man of the image. And I was very struck that the White House photographer, who I guess who did Trump in his first term, I don't know if it's the same one now, but he had done all these, I don't know, he'd done like 10 presidents or something. And he said that everybody else was just like in and out. It was just like a task. They were quick.
mm,
He said Trump, he took forever because every tiny adjustment, everything had to be just so because he's a man of the image. And everything he does is designed to generate a certain kind of image profile. And no detail is too small, including that's why now we've got this administration. I think the new tally with Janine Pirro is 23 high officials come from Fox. And
yeah,
why is that important? Because they know how to lie smoothly. They know how to look good, or they have a certain look to them. Think about Kristi Noem posing with her hair extensions and her Rolex in front of Bukele's lager. Um, and she looks the way that Trump wants, his ladies to look. And they're smooth liars. The same with Hegseth. He has, as we know, he's not very qualified to be a defense secretary, but he was a Fox Business host, and he's a smooth talker, and he looks accent on looks, clean cut. And so this is part of the political theater: the people, the messengers, as well as the images that are shown.
yeah. Well, along these lines, so we're talking about politics as an aesthetic experience. Before we turn to questions, what are we seeing right now? In LA, and what are we going to see this weekend? So I'm in DC. Our PRI's office are 3 blocks from the White House. We can't even get to our offices starting on Thursday. We've sent everyone home for the week. What are we going to see this weekend? We'll still have protests in LA. We'll also have this big spectacle in DC. Knowing what you know, like what are you expecting?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to provoke a crisis. They the the response that they are manufacturing, bringing, federalizing National Guard, even bringing in Marines, it's wildly disproportionate to the threat. The protests are scattered, decentralized, and overwhelmingly peaceful. There's no need for this. And in fact, the LAPD had said there was no need for all of this. So you have to ask why, what are they getting out of this? And this is about many things, but it's about showing these state security forces, that's what you call them in other countries, and the military as compliant with the commander in chief. It's also about deterrence in the future. Trump, he's a narcissist like all these leaders, and he doesn't want his big birthday celebration, the sight of it, the aesthetics of it, ruined by protesters, because any parade has a parade route, and we stand there and we can either be clapping or not clapping. And think of all the tanks there. I mean, this is like the aesthetics of intimidation. I'm very uncomfortable as a historian of military coups that there's this whole assembly. I don't like it at all. Just I don't think there's going to be a coup, but I don't like it at all, and either do a lot of other people who study these things. So it's modeling the compliance of the military, and that's in DC. At the same time, the military is being asked to help crush protesters, and that's not a role that they've had before. So it's all about increasing the power of the executive, showing that they're omnipotent, and also making people too afraid, trying to make people too afraid to protest in the future, including not only on his stupid birthday, but into the future.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. We're going to turn to some questions now. So we got a handful here. So for Mary, she says, I believe it's possible that the head of the executive branch is being manipulated through their emotions, biases, and needs by others who are much clearer about the strategies and techniques you're discussing. Do you concur? And if so, who are the smart people who are cynically organizing? So I guess basically, like, how much is Trump really running the show, and how much is he, kind of being kind of manipulated behind the scenes?
I don't know if he's being manipulated, because he's both very relentlessly focused and efficient about the things he cares about. He cares about propaganda and emotionally conditioning people, the stuff I said before. He really cares about making money from the presidency. So, in Trump 1.0, he spent 1/3 of his time visiting Trump branded properties. That meant playing golf or whatever the heck he was doing. So that was a Washington Post investigation. So he wasn't there 1/3 of the time. And so that making money and doing things that benefit him personally and his family, but really only him, is part of it. So I don't know if he's manipulated, but he delegates. He delegated to Musk. He let Musk come in, and there were things he got in return because he's venal, right? He got the money to be elected, and God knows what else. We don't even know. He got legitimacy for cryptocurrency through Musk. That's really big, because that's giving him, ultimately, that's going to give him billions, and that's what he cares about. But there are people, the most important people who are very, very dangerous fanatics are Stephen Miller, who is in my book from the first time, on immigration, and Russ, I think it's pronounced Vogt.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the one who famously, he's Project 2025. He's the head of the Office of Management and Budget. He had
Wrote
that
the
job
section on
before.
executive power, right? And Project 2025. Yeah.
And he, all we need to know about his personality and morality is that he said numerous times in 2023, 2024, that he wanted, if Trump came back to office, he wanted to, quote, put the civil servants into trauma. He wants to traumatize them and make them feel that they're afraid to come to the office, and he wants to humiliate them. Like, so this is just, he's like a sadist. Very, very damaged. These are very damaged people. And every regime, I have somewhere in my book something about this. There are these people who sit around waiting, thinking 24/7 about how to make others' lives difficult, how to persecute people efficiently. And I think I listed Miller, and also Erdogan in Turkey, this guy who was his ministry, he was the minister of the justice minister, because Erdogan arrested like 100,000 people. So these are these dangerous and depraved minds who sit around, people sitting around trying to make our lives miserable. And so there's many of them. And the kind of top competence that is valued by Trump is loyalty, and also fanaticism. There's a lot of fanatics. Kennedy is a fanatic. These are extremists, and they play well with religious extremists. A certain mentality, right? That they're in the right. There's no other way. This is what has to be done, no matter what the cost. And that's very scary. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, I think about Pete Hegseth, who, as you rightly said, I mean, with his hair slicked back, he's camera ready, every time
Yeah,
you see him. But if he takes his shirt off, you see the extremism, right? He's
yeah,
got
it's
these
tattoos.
tattoos that are, Christian nationalist tattoos. He's got a Crusaders slogan, "God wills it," tattooed to his arm over a sword. So, you get this kind of combination of both, right? The kind of slick, camera ready, can tell the lie easily, but then also like literally inked in his skin, the extremism there. So Kate asks, how do you become a historian of fascism? So, yeah, it's an interesting topic always of an author. Like, how did you come to this? Like, what brought you to this work?
It was a kind of roundabout thing. I grew up in well, now it's burned, Pacific Palisades in California, and beautiful, tranquil place on the ocean near Malibu. So the farthest from, you think, from fascism or anything, but it was a place where a lot of famous Germans went into exile. And so Thomas Mann and Arnold Schoenberg, like famous intellectuals. And so I knew about this, and I just got very intrigued with what it meant that these people had to uproot themselves and start over. And Schoenberg's, the composer, his son was a teacher at my high school. So I started talking to him. And so somehow I just got interested, because I didn't, my mom's Christian. I went to Presbyterian nursery school and stuff. And we didn't ever, my dad's Sephardic Jewish, but we never went to synagogue, like not even once. So it was very, very secular. And nobody was connected to the Holocaust. No family, because my dad's from the Middle East, my mom's from Scotland. So it wasn't that either. There was no, because some people like Jason Stanley, his grandparents were
Right.
affected by that, but I didn't have that. I didn't hear about it at home. So it was really from this, like just thinking about these people, and hearing how difficult it was for them. And so then I decided, in college and grad school, I started getting interested in Italy. So I decided to focus on Mussolini. And so that's what I was doing for many years, writing books on fascism. And then when Trump came on the scene, I had already started writing for CNN, but on history things. And that was the extent of my public scholarship, was just doing some pieces for CNN. And then when Trump came in, that changed everything. And I looked at him, I heard him speak, and I thought, uh-oh, this is totally familiar. And I started writing about Bannon and Trump, and then it just all took off from there. And then I decided to write this. It's like, in retrospect, kind of crazy to write this book that's global, that goes over 100 years. I'd never written anything like that. And that's Strongmen. And Trump is in it. And some people didn't want Trump to be in the book. They were like, are you crazy? What does he have to do with anything? Why are you putting him in a book with Mobutu? but I think it was warranted. So that's the story of that.
Yeah, if anyone wants to dive deeper, I'm just going to read a couple of titles here. Previous books: Italian Fascism's Empire Cinema, Italian Mobilities and Fascist Modernities from Italy, 1922 to 1945. So if you want to dive deeper, you can go there. So from Teresa, if we are in the crisis phase heading toward or in a police state, what are the most effective responses to halt this? We had a couple that are in that. What do we do?
Yeah. So I the most recent piece I wrote for my Substack that's called Lucid is actually it's about how one of the reasons they're having this disproportionate response is that they, just as we talked about the aesthetics of power, they need to show they're dominant, but they also are extremely threatened by what's been going on, that ordinary people have come out bravely, inspired by decency and empathy and solidarity to try and stop ICE from taking people away. And it's happened over and over again. It's very moving that people come out and it's taking risk for themselves to help the vulnerable. And that is what authoritarians cannot stand. That is the most, I think, it's not only Christian love, but it's forms of love. They can't abide that. They can't have that. And so they've got to shut that down immediately. So this is why, however we do it, showing, becoming. I also wrote a piece called "Why We Resist" in Lucid that I'm actually quite proud of, and it's about how they need to shut down all signs of morality and decency and kindness, but we can embody those values in our actions. However, we're going to do it, whether we're on the street or we're helping people to register to vote, or we're doing charity work. We can do that, and that's one way that we can also start talking to people who are still, into MAGA or other forms of fanaticism. I think it's important to have these conversations. So those are some things we can do in the name of different values.
Yeah. I just want to say, I should have plugged it at the beginning. I'll plug it now and at the end. You absolutely should sign up for Ruth's newsletter, Lucid, on Substack. I'm a subscriber. I'm a reader. And there's the book and all that, but there is also a lot of I actually had a quote that you almost exactly said. I'm going to read it because what I appreciate about Lucid and your ongoing commentary on the air too is that I think there is this deep humanitarian and moral core to what you're saying, which I find really helpful in your work. So it's not just analytical, but there's a kind of moral core to it that I hear coming through. So you wrote, authoritarianism depends on breaking the horizontal bonds of solidarity and empathy that lead people to risk their safety to protest injustices against others. And I think that's really the core of what you were just
Yeah.
saying. But you'll get a steady diet of that that was helpful to all of us, I think, right now. So I'm going to link together two quick questions that are from Larry and Mary Kate that I think are similar. So half or more of the country sees right through Trump. Just a quick little editorial on that. I keep remembering and reminding everyone that in this last election, 40% of the country
Yeah,
did not vote.
I
So
know.
the split was 30%, 30%, 40%. That's the split, right? And it was just this kind of
Horrible.
minimal difference between Harris and Trump. But it really was his 30% of the country that brought him to power, right? And on public opinion polls, that's typically what we see. His favorability rating rarely goes above low 40s. That's kind of where it is. But so half the country sees through him. That's right. What does successful resistance look like? What are some strategies? And then Mary Kate very specifically says, I plan to go to the protests on Saturday. There's No King Day protests going on all over the country this weekend, including here in DC. What do you recommend based on protest movements? How can they be, maybe successful Maybe what to watch out for?
Um, often with protests, it depends when it's happening, but like it's very important to protest now because we're in a phase of authoritarian consolidation. And I think that, that as I said before, this escalation of force is because of the upcoming protests. Not just his parade, it's the protest, the No Kings. That's a brilliant slogan, and it's directly offensive to Trump. And it's easy to think that this protest alone doesn't change anything, but you can't really think that way because it's like building something. Um, and I know there's a lot of frustration with what can we do, um, and why aren't others and institutions and the Democratic Party doing more? But and they should do more. They should have been more prepared, yes. But no country on earth has been, especially one of the size of the US. It's a big country. It's a complex country. Um, no country has constructed a big tent, organized pro-democratic movement in 4 months. It just takes longer. And so every protest, especially if you're in DC, but anywhere, is generating images that counter and experiences of solidarity and empowerment, meeting new people, that are like insurance for the future. So I don't know what will happen. There's probably going to be, as it builds, there's going to be more force used. That's very scary. We have to acknowledge that. But right now, in the arc of an authoritarian state, this is where it's important to show others that someone is doing something.
Great. No, thanks for that. So from Richard, we can see Trump's acolytes lying regularly. Do you think they know they are lying? Are they consciously lying, or is their focus much narrower on ambition or power? I'm thinking of Rubio in this regard, right? Who we have very different vision of Rubio in Trump's first term than we have right now. There's obviously, I think, some people, like you said, who are just, yep, I get up in the morning and what gets me out of bed is thinking about how I'm going to make people's lives miserable. I absolutely agree with you that that's going on. What about the other people, the kind of enablers there? And does it matter if they know they're lying or don't know they're lying, if they're still going to lie?
I think it matters in terms of their bad faith. Like, think about all the people who were denying vaccines at Fox and then getting their own kids vaccinated and
Mm,
themselves vaccinated, so they would be safe. Or I often think about the fact that Rupert Murdoch briefly after the election of 2020, he circulated a memo and he had a plan. I'm really haunted by this, for all the top hosts, Carlson and Hannity, to come out together on camera and say that Biden won the election and just stop with this business and put the record straight. And then I don't know, I'm not an employee of Fox, but it didn't happen. And the opposite happened. So all these people who know perfectly well, so it became, a propaganda point.
yeah.
And
And
now,
their own
and
polling
now,
unit called it for Biden, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, their own polling early
Yeah.
on. Um, and so now it's a loyalty test question. Because it's a lie, you have to show that you believe the lie and you will repeat the lie. And that's how propaganda spreads. So it does matter in that regard that they know they're lying. But sure, they all know, and it's part of serving Trump. And it gets to a point where almost everything you're saying is a lie, as well as the undergirding is a lie. Um, and the problem is some of these people think that if they just do a few demonstrations of loyalty, then Trump will leave them alone. Every time you're in it, he's going to call on you for more, and there's no bottom. So that's the sad trajectory of people who know better, and they do it anyway, and they fool the public. Election denial and lying to the public I actually see it as a form of corruption.
Hmm.
Because it's defrauding the public, actually, including about medical stuff. I think that's a good frame to see it. It's fraud.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Let's see what I got here. All right, here's the theological one. We'll see what you want to do with this one. All right, so we got Carol, who's given us Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Is this in any way helpful in explaining why so many Christians seem blinded to the truth and reality of Trump's corruption and the big lie?
Yeah, I think that I think that there's a chain of when they're going to church, and if they're hearing their ministers and pastors uh, kind of have interpretations and be pro-Trump, then this is keeping them in a lack of enlightenment. And I think this is part of the problem. And it's not just the big heads of churches, it's how a little bit parallel to what the other question about the secular part. And I think that there's a reason that a lot of what has gone on in the sphere of education, how those laws on the state level that they're supposed to take away the study of injustice and slavery, and because the wording of the laws is that you're not supposed to cause people emotional distress.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What they're trying to do is to get you to forget your conscience. And so this of course attaches very well to the study of justice, also as Jesus wanted it. And there's a lot of effort expended. That goes back to why they have to work to get the sympathies of religious institutions, because if you start listening to that voice of justice harnessed to faith, that's very powerful, and they can't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give one little quick riff on that verse. I'm trained in sociology and theology, and when growing up, so I grew up evangelical, as most of you know. And when I read that verse growing up, it was always kind of very spiritualized, right? It was literal, like it was like the literal power of Satan and demons, and like it was literal, like those were the things like roaming around in the world, the principalities and the powers. I think as I've gotten older and kind of thinking more sociologically, I think of that verse as maybe the most sociological verse in the New Testament, because it gives us a way to talk about the power of institutions, the power of culture, and as you said, Ruth, like the corruption of culture, the corruption of those values that sit in those institutions, and that even when the person is gone, right, that kind of create all this, we may be left, right, with a kind of culture of corruption that sticks with us that we're going to have to do something with on it. And so maybe you say a little bit about this in your book about what happens when the great leader falls. And so we're kind of at time here. Maybe you'll kind of take us home on that note, and maybe with anything that you see that's hopeful on the way things are going, or where things might take a turn for the better from where we are.
Yeah, I really think I've been using since I don't know, just a few weeks after the inauguration. It was clear that the scale of the corruption and immorality is so vast that I started using this language, and I said, "There's a reckoning that's coming," and I keep saying it. Initially, my piece, this is for Lisa, said there'll be revelation and a reckoning, but I thought that sounded too, you know,
That'll
uh,
preach.
yeah. So I just kept reckoning. But I
Mhm.
truly believe, because there's going to be a lot of hardship, people's Social Security will stop coming. There are all kinds of
Yeah.
things. And I do believe that eventually people's eyes will be opened because it just the violence and the all the things that are going on. And there'll be some kind of reckoning with the bad faith of local GOP people, Trump himself, and perhaps something better can come out of this. And this is a long-term optimism, but I truly believe that that there'll be, for this audience, I could say there is going to be some, we can use revelation in any way, and I think they're all valid. They're all valid.
All right. Well, from your lips to God's ears, on that one, we'll end there. But thank you so much for being with us. And I just want to say, like, I am so grateful for the work that you're doing in the world, for the country, and helping us kind of see lucid with some clarity. I love the title of the Substack. So the Substack is Lucid. The book is Strongman, Mussolini to the Present. And thank you, thank you, thank you. We will look for more coming from your direction as we're all struggling to find our way through. So thanks, Ruth.
Thank you, and thank you for the amazing work you're doing. And I've learned so much from it.